What more needs to be done in your view?
Well, we have done really well with vaccination in this country, and we're in almost a unique position as Britain, having vaccinated large numbers of people with both Pfizer, which is a messenger RNA vaccine, and AstraZeneca, which is an adenovirus vaccine. And therefore, we have the data of both vaccines, how they've worked, how many people after each vaccination, how many people have been still diagnosed with COVID, how many people of those have been hospitalized, how many of those have died. So we have, I think, that data. And my view is that if we publish that data, obviously you've got to be careful how you publish it. You've got to publish it in a form that tells people the truth about the vaccines. But if you publish that data, it will have a major impact on restoring the credibility of AstraZeneca worldwide. We don't have a problem with AstraZeneca here, but worldwide countries are either refusing AstraZeneca for certain categories of people, or you even get countries in Africa now refusing the vaccine. This is completely unjustified. I think the full data set will show that AstraZeneca is a highly effective vaccine. It will save huge amounts of lives, hospitalization, and people getting long COVID. So it's really important. Then we have, as a country, a huge interest in this, because even if we get ourselves vaccinated, if the virus is still mutating in different parts of the world, then the risk is there that you get a mutation, comes back into the UK, and vaccines may be less effective against it.
Well, but how do we get that message across? Because I mean, I think it was Denmark who banned it altogether a week or so ago. I mean, these are countries with, you know, some solid scientific backgrounds. Their scientists are looking at this now. If they're saying they're not happy to use it, how do we convince them otherwise?
Well, I think you convince them by, as I say, putting out the full data set. So in Israel, for example, with the Pfizer vaccine, you can see a chart that says numbers vaccinated. Of those who are vaccinated, 1 dose, 2 dose, how many got COVID, how many of those were hospitalized, how many died. And the results are remarkable. Now, I believe we will have exactly the same results for AstraZeneca. Indeed, buried away in some of the slides of the MHRA in this country are what people have done as self-reporting after having vaccination. And the figures for AstraZeneca and Pfizer are roughly the same, and they're both dramatically good, by the way. So I think if you put out the full data set, it will have an impact. And yes, it's true that some regulators in countries like Denmark are taking this view, but they're taking it, frankly, on unjustified and an unbalanced view of the material. And the European Medical Agency, which is the equivalent for Europe of our MHRA, they're not taking the same view. So one other thing that we suggest in this report, we suggest a whole lot of things that the government might do to make the data more accessible for people. But one of the things we need to do is for the leading countries of the world to put their regulators together, their top scientists together, so that they can pronounce on some of these issues, and so that you don't get different regulators taking different decisions in different countries, often on a very, very narrow view of risk.
Well, look, whereas I'm sure a lot of people would agree with you, there still is this, it's a known risk when it comes to AstraZeneca. And we know when you look at the figures, it is an absolutely tiny risk. But you know what it's like to deal with big figures and then to have to, you know, face people, individual people affected by this. So, what would you say to those people, indeed in the UK, who have lost a loved one to a blood clot caused by a vaccine?
Yeah, so of course, any loss of life is terrible and tragic, and you know, of course, our sympathy and our hearts go out to the people who have suffered. But the point is, you're much, much more likely to be at risk of COVID than you are of a blood clot. And probably over the next few weeks, we will have a better understanding of those very rare cases of blood clots, how we might prevent them. But the chances of getting such a clot is about 1 in 250,000. And you know, if you take, for example, oral contraception, the chances are more like 1 in 2,000. So if you take a proper view of risk, you're much, much more likely to suffer as a result of COVID than you are with these very, very small numbers of cases around blood clots. And one of the problems, I mean, we'll publish a paper in the next few weeks showing how you could vaccinate the world, the whole of the world, this year. And I tell you why I think that's going to be a vital prerequisite for government around the world to come together and try and do, is that this virus is mutating all the time. I mean, just in India alone, you've got several hundred mutations just in these last weeks. Now, most of those will be insignificant, but some of them may be significant. And so your risk is, if you're not careful and you don't get on with this vaccination program, then you're going to get a mutation against which the vaccines are much less or effective or ineffective. And just remember, AstraZeneca, along with the other adenovirus vaccine, Johnson & Johnson, they're cheaper, they're the ones that the developing world will use, and if they're discredited for any reason, the whole of the global program for vaccination is going to get slowed down and disrupted. So this is really, really important, and our government has got a huge interest in getting these facts out there and getting people to realize it's a good vaccine, an excellent vaccine, and one that should be used globally.
Can we change subject, if you're okay with that, and talk about the Greensill inquiry? I know you're going to be called before one of the inquiries, at least, aren't you? I mean, what is your take on where we are currently in terms of the lobbying situation? Are we still in the situation we were back in your days in Number 10, or has there been much change since then?
I think there's probably been quite a lot of change because of the ways people communicate with each other. I mean, I was saying to someone earlier today, I didn't have a mobile phone when I was Prime Minister. So, the issues of texting didn't arise. I mean, obviously, it's a different world today. Look, I think all of this is going to be looked at. It should be looked at. And, I'm perfectly happy to cooperate in any way anyone wants. But I think the best thing with these types of situation is to get them looked into thoroughly. You come up with a set of rules that make sense and mean that, people have confidence in the system going forward.
I mean, so you didn't get, when you were in Number 10, you didn't get any text messages from people asking for a quiet word, but you may have had a phone call or a letter. I mean, is that fundamentally wrong? Is it sleazy, as the Labour Party is now calling it?
Look, there's nothing wrong with receiving representations from people, and there's nothing actually wrong with lobbying. I mean, lobbying is a sort of loaded word, but people in government, of course, they should receive information. What's necessary is that the decision-making process then is obviously done in an objective way. And I think by and large, in our system, it is. I mean, I think we've got to be careful of overstating the problems within our own system. By and large, the British system's a pretty clean system. But, yes, of course, as a result of what's happening, people want to look at the rules, they should do, and then let's see what they come out with.
Look, I know we're running out of time. I want to ask you about a couple of issues. First and foremost, Johnny Mercer, who's resigned or been pushed, whichever way you want to view it, really, as Veterans Minister. He's very concerned about the way we're looking after our veterans and the Veterans Pledge to remove people from investigation after a significant period of time. Now, you've had a very close relationship with the armed forces, some good, some bad. We don't need to sort of reiterate all of that. But do you think it is, right that we do provide our armed forces with some better safeguards once they become veterans?
I think so, yes, because they're doing an incredibly difficult job. They're doing it on behalf of the country. They're putting their lives on the line for us, for our protection and our security. And so, obviously, again, you've got to have proper rules in place. But my instinct is always to try and protect servicemen and women and to give them every support.
I mean, clearly, Mr Mercer's sort of concern is primarily at this stage about those in their 70s and 80s who served tours in Northern Ireland. Do you think the government has failed them?
Well, I don't think the government's failed them, but I think it's really important we take account of the fact that these are people who are operating in incredibly difficult circumstances. And, as I say, my basic disposition is to be as protective of them as possible and as helpful as possible, because you've got to be really careful when people are in combat situations. They're having to take decisions very, very fast. Their own lives are at risk, and there are people that are trying to attack them. You've got to be understanding of that situation and not try and superimpose a view based on circumstances that may be completely unrealistic, given the types of challenges that those people were facing. So no, I would be wanting to be supportive of them.
Look, I know we're almost out of time, but can I just quickly ask you about George Floyd and the situation in the United States? Since 2016, the United States has become a more divided country. New administration now, and then this significant verdict in the George Floyd trial. Do you get the impression that things are starting to significantly change in the United States, that some of those divisions are starting to heal?
Look, the verdict, I think, is a turning point. I think it's a really important verdict. And it's important also that people remember that some of the most persuasive testimony in that case came from other police officers and indeed from senior police officers in that police force, saying that what happened was completely against their own rules. So, I hope it is a turning point in the relationship between the Black community in the US and the police. Whether it heals the divisions in American society, I don't know. Those divisions run pretty deep, I think. But let's hope it is, because it's important for all modern Western societies that they try and resolve these issues in a way that brings people together.